Hi, this is Heather Matthews. I'm our Chief Communications Officer, and I'm here with Brian Warren, SigEp's CEO. And tonight we are going to discuss all things financial performance. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Brian. Before I do that, just a couple of quick housekeeping things. We will have plenty of time for Q&A at the end. And so if you have a question, don't hesitate to put it in the Q&A box and we will get to those. We will group them because a lot of people sometimes have the same questions, so may not answer them in order, just so you know. But we'll group them and get to as many as we can. So if you have questions, go ahead and put them in the Q&A box. If you want to say hello, feel free to put it in the chat box, or if you have comments or reflections on things we're talking about tonight, feel free to put them in the chat. So I will go ahead and turn it over to Brian, and thanks so much.
Great, thank you so much, Heather. And thank you everyone for joining us this evening for our first stakeholder call of the new fiscal year. As a reminder, we have another stakeholder call that's scheduled for October, and between now and then you should see a couple of impact reports on the Ruck Leadership Institute and the Tragos Quest to Greece, which just wrapped up last month. For this call, we're going to be focused on SigEp's finances. And during this call, we hope to share a few things with you. One, sharing guiding philosophies when making financial decisions and when we're building financial plans. The second is how we've performed in the last fiscal year and what that means for SigEp's future. The third is how we're allocating resources in the new fiscal year, so the fiscal year that we just entered. And then we'll close with some Q&A. So before getting into any of the numbers, let's start by sharing our guiding financial philosophies, so what we look at as our guardrails and our compass when making financial decisions or we're determining longer term financial plans. So when we look at guiding philosophies, first, we must acknowledge the financial challenges of our undergraduates today. When you look at tuition and fees, they're at an all-time high. The cost of college has increased 200% in the last 40 years, which sounds insane. Student debt has been at historic highs, and in fact, student debt saw its sharpest increase ever in 2020. Students today are working their way through school. 50% of SigEp undergraduates work while in school, and 78% of them reported paying all or some of their own dues last year. And all of that makes us sensitive to any increases in fees that we may pass on to undergraduates. And it challenges us to think about and invest in strategies that produce additional revenues that alleviate some of the weight that are put on the shoulders of our undergraduate members. The second thing that we look at as a philosophy is that we must remember that we are stewards of undergraduate and donor contributions, those contributions to the Grand Chapter and to our educational foundation. Every dollar that we take in, we think should flow back out to our members in the form of services, programs, and scholarships. Every expense must be thoughtfully considered, and every expense should be defendable to our stakeholders. The third thing we look at as a philosophy is that we must consider every expense as an investment. So we think about things in terms of ROI. What's the impact of this expense on the undergraduate experience? What's the impact on our ability to recruit and retain volunteers, to recruit and retain staff members who are effective in their role and who influence the undergraduate experience? We must also have a defined process for assessing and evaluating major initiatives. So did we do what we intended to do? Do we need to tweak anything in our strategy? Do we continue to make this investment in the future? But we must be critical of every expense and think about it as an investment. The fourth thing we look at is thinking long-term. So our annual budget and long-term financial plan are tied to our strategic plan, which is a long-term document. When we do something, we need to be sure that we have the sustainable source of financing for that effort. We have to think about not only the launch of that initiative, but the annual execution of that initiative, the additional investments and enhancements that we will need to make over time, and any increases over time that may be tied to inflation as well. We challenge ourselves to understand how investments today will affect the organization and SigEp years down the road. I hope that you've noticed that we don't seem afraid of making decisions that are perhaps financially painful in the short term, when we know it is in the best long-term interest of SigEp, our chapters, our members, and other stakeholders. You can look at our Balanced Man program alignment from 2015, our substance-free facility policy that took effect in 2017, how we're doing really leaning into year-round recruitment and challenging our chapters to think beyond rush. All of those things have had a short-term impact, but they look to be paying off in the long run, as we'll talk about more when we look at how we have performed this past fiscal year. The fifth thing we take into consideration is transparency with our stakeholders. Calls like these that should take place annually, fund reports that are sent out quarterly, access to giving history and fund balances on My SigEp. All of these things we look at as investments in transparency, because we want people to know what's going on and want people to be a part of and add value to the decision-making process that takes place in SigEp. And the last thing that we look at as a guiding philosophy is having strong internal controls and a constant eye on SigEp's financial health. We have, as you would expect, regular evaluation of SigEp's financial performance and financial position. So looking at our performance relative to budget, are we running an annual surplus? For us, it's extremely difficult as a nonprofit to run deficits. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. We also look at the balance sheet and making sure that we have adequate reserves in case there are some unexpected things that happen, like a pandemic, that require us to think about allocating resources differently and providing alleviating some financial stress that are on our undergraduates. We also facilitate activities of oversight entities. So for us, our finance committee, our audit committee, and our chapter finance and corporate compliance committee, all of those committees play an extraordinarily helpful role, keeping us focused and keeping our fiscal health strong. And then lastly, we have an annual audit, and we strive for a clean audit, which we've achieved every year for the last few years, and have good financial controls and proper accounting practices in place in order to ensure that we're making all good decisions and able to comply with all of the financial philosophies that I've just walked through. So doing all of this puts us in a position to feel confident in the financial positions and decisions that we make moving forward. So again, every time we're entering into a budgeting conversation or a long-term financial conversation, we're taking all of these philosophies into account and weaving them into the discussion. So with that said, I'm going to talk a little bit about financial performance and what drives financial performance for SigEp entities. So the Fraternity, the SigEp Educational Foundation, and SigEp National Housing. And there's a lot to talk about. I think we'll spend a little bit more time talking about the Fraternity and the SigEp Educational Foundation and touch just a little bit on SigEp National Housing. We're only 2 weeks into the new fiscal year, so we're not going to have financial statements, screenshots of financial statements to put on the screen. But we are able to talk about, because we know what drives revenue, we're able to talk about the things that drive revenue. And we're able to talk about expenses because we do a good job keeping an eye on expenses throughout the year. And we can talk about, with some confidence, how we're going to perform at year end. So let's start with the Fraternity. Total revenues for the Fraternity are roughly $8 million. The pie chart now that's on the screen illustrates the dependency that we have on membership revenues, specifically new member recruitment and our fall and our spring bills. Almost 65% of annual revenue comes from those three sources. So we have a great understanding of how we're going to perform for the year pretty early based on what we're seeing with fall recruitment and chapter performance, which is going to dictate the fall and the spring bill. So keeping a pulse on membership gives us the ability to pivot pretty early if we see something concerning unfolding, something unexpected that would suggest that revenue may not be what we budgeted. Fortunately, membership has been strong this year. We've recruited 4,893 new members in the last fiscal year, which is a 20% increase over the prior fiscal year, and it's a 4% increase over fiscal year 20. And on a per chapter basis, gets us right in line with where we were pre-pandemic. Total membership last year was 11,460. And that's versus 11,028 the year prior. So a 4% increase on membership as well. Both of these numbers exceeded what we budgeted. So again, that's a big part of us running a surplus for the year for the fraternity. And for the slide that's on the screen, you'll notice the significant dip that is there from about 2015 to 2022. And again, that's in reference to what I mentioned earlier, the tough decisions made around 2015 with the BMP and substance-free facilities that had some short-term financial headwinds thrown at us, but were in the best long-term interests of the organization. I think we're starting to see that growth trajectory turn around, and we've got a lot of confidence in our ability to grow in the future. The other big part about running a surplus for the fraternity is having a successful fundraising year, and the fraternity receiving the budgeted grant from the foundation for the fiscal year, which we did this year. And we'll talk more about the foundation's performance and the success we've had with fundraising when we get to the foundation. You'll see that it's about 15% of annual revenue right now. The other sources of revenue just to keep an eye on are the grant from the Journal Fund, which is essentially an endowment fund that's influenced by annual contributions from membership and from market performance. There's also a slice in this pie called miscellaneous, almost all of which comes from the SigEp's store, shared services with SigEp National Housing, and AVC payments for regional director and volunteer services providers. So when we look at revenue, we did outperform for the fraternity this year. Again, membership was up, miscellaneous revenue was up because of the SigEp store, and our grant revenue was on budget. So revenue looked really strong for the fraternity this year. On the expense side, we also did a good job of managing expenses. And so the financial performance for the fraternity will be strong this year. Similar to what we did for revenues, you'll see a pie chart on the screen now that's illustrating how expenses are allocated. And some of these things are lumped together. You can also look at this as what our charitable contributions pay for, or what membership fees pay for. Most of our annual expenses are allocated to programs and events. So this is going to include a portion of Conclave, but it includes all of Carlson, Ruck, the Tragos Quest to Greece, again, Conclave, Life After College and career coaching, and all the personnel that are critical to the success of those programs. Frontline Services are next. So regional directors, volunteer services, new chapter development, other fraternity services that are working hand in hand with our undergraduates and with our volunteers. And these are the two areas that we want to see grow as a percentage of total expenses as we move forward. Technology expenses, you'll see it as an orange slice of the pie. Those are closely tied to the two areas I just mentioned, so programs and events and fraternity services. They include the standard hardware and software for staff to operate and deliver services, but they also include SigEp and Salesforce licenses for our data and our resource management, and allowing our members to self-manage their respective record. It also includes the Balanced Man program app, the functionality tied to that app and enhancements annually. And it also includes our programs and events platform, Cvent, which allows our programs and events team to effectively manage our programs. These expenses will likely remain relatively constant unless there's a major undertaking that we have with platform development. The yellow slice of pie there that's larger as well is insurance and member safety related expenses. We've done a great job of keeping that number relatively constant, as we've done a great job with our behavior. Our claims have been very few. We've continued to have a 0% loss run with our insurance carrier for now the last 6 years. And that has had a great impact on the relationship with our insurance carrier. And it's also challenged our insurance carrier to have different interactions with other fraternities and challenge them to do the things that SigEp has done for the last 7 years. Also want to note overhead, which is basically fraternity leadership, information systems, staff, accounting, and administrative staff that are all critical to running the organization. And you'll see that, excuse me, that's about 14% of all expenses. And we've made that a focus to bring that number down as low as we can, so that a greater percentage of the expenses are being directed to the front line, so services and programs and the things that our undergraduates really feel every day. So yes, insurance does include self-insurance. Thanks, Graham. Some of the expenses and the changes year over year are, as most organizations feel, they're influenced by market conditions. So for us, we look at the CPI and we look at the higher education price index as two benchmarks for us. We keep a close eye on them and know how they're moving. And recently, as you've likely seen and felt in your own respective profession, they are moving aggressively higher as of late. And that creates challenges for all businesses, and we're not immune to that. We know that some expenses are going to increase. And so we have to think about how we respond to that. Do we pass along that expense to members, or do we find a way to finance those increases through some other means? And again, to reference back to our philosophies, as much as we can, we try to do the latter. We want to lighten the financial burden as much as we can on our undergraduates. If you look at the 2020 to 2021 academic year and all the curveballs that we were all thrown that year, I think that's a great example and a good reference point for us, trying to minimize the chance that finances are an obstacle for chapters to thrive, or for memberships new members to join or to be retained. Heather, if you don't mind going to the next slide, this shows 4 fiscal years and the average amount that's billed and the percentage increase year over year. The changes that we've implemented to the fall bill have been entirely related to the expansion of the Carlson Leadership Academy. So we increased that base fee at the 2021 conclave. So all of that is 100% passed through back to undergraduates. And then there's the consistent increase to the per man fee that's tied to the higher ed price index. And again, we cap that, but that is also in our bylaws. This is, again, if you look at the 2020 year for the fall bill and that 32% almost decrease, that we pulled a bunch of things out of the fall bill considering the circumstances, because we wanted to lighten that lift as much as we could for undergraduates that year. And still, you've seen just a slight increase each year since then, again, trying to create a more manageable bill for our undergraduates. The spring bill has been a direct consequence of how we've performed with behavior and how insurance premiums have moved. We've been able to see no increase from our carrier as a result of what we've been able to do with behavior, chapter culture, and the carrier's perceived risk that SigEp brings to the portfolio for them. So we look at this as something to be very proud of. But if we're not, excuse me, if we're not passing any expenses on to members, it really does narrow down what we can do to drive the top line and then reinvest in the undergraduate experience. So one of the ways that we're able to do that is grow, increase membership. And again, I think we're poised to do that. We'll talk about some of the investments we're making to do that later in this session. The second thing that we can do is increase the foundation's assets and the investment that it's making each year in the undergraduate experience. This is a significant point because the financial investment needed to realize the objectives of our strategic plan. We've identified more than $4 million in new spending tied to the strategic plan. If you remember, the top line for the fraternity right now is $8 million. So a significant increase relative to where we are. And if you're thinking about that in terms of new endowments, right now we have a 4.25% spending policy. So that'd be about $94 million in new endowment to the educational foundation. So the needs of the organization are significant. And I think that's a good segue to conversation about our educational foundation and how we're doing with fundraising. Before we really dig in, I do want to start with just some basic education on what the foundation does and how it operates. We do operate as a community foundation of sorts for SigEp's chapters. So we raise charitable contributions from donors who want to invest in educational programming, scholarships, and learning communities. Donors can make unrestricted gifts. So those unrestricted dollars go into what we call the annual fund. And those resources are allocated at the trustee's discretion for our immediate needs, like the undergraduate programs that I've mentioned earlier. We also raise restricted dollars. So those are contributions that are earmarked to a specific chapter or to specific programs or scholarships that can impact one or many chapters. Secondly, we make grants, general grants that go to the fraternity, and then many grants that go to SigEp's chapters across the country who have alumni giving to those chapter restricted funds. The foundation will then make scholarships to members because of the generosity of the donors that are giving to either the chapter fund or specific scholarship funds or to the educational foundation in general. So a lot of what we're able to do is dependent upon the money that we're able to raise through the generosity of donors each year. Raising money, like any foundation, is dependent upon inspiring donors to give and hopefully retaining those donors and growing the donor base over time. So it's important for us to share the stories of SigEp's impact on undergraduates each year. And we've seen some, I think, tremendous success on the foundation side. And we've been able to do some pretty incredible things for undergraduate brothers as a result of that generosity. If we just look at the past 2 years of giving to the foundation and look specifically at the number of donors who have contributed, you'll see on the screen that this past year, we had 5,242 donors contribute to the foundation. And that's about a 14% increase over the prior year, which we had 4,608 donors to the foundation. And it's important for us to continue to see that type of involvement in the foundation and that type of participation in giving, because there's still so much to do. If you look at the right side of the screen, I do want to say thank you to the 5 chapters that are so active during Founders Day of Giving and are so supportive of the educational foundation. We greatly appreciate that level of consistent support. So last year, the foundation raised, so the fiscal year that we just closed, raised $3.8 million. That's a little less than the previous year, but just looking at the total is a little bit misleading. So we've tried to pull apart annual fund and restricted funds and pull out estate gifts from this as well. So the areas of giving that were down this year relative to prior years are estate gifts and housing related contributions. And the housing related contributions are really driven by the number of our alumni and volunteer corporations that are in a housing campaign. And there were far fewer housing campaigns taking place in a pandemic. So this is likely going to be an area that ramps up and that we're spending more time on as we work with ABCs to launch local campaigns now. Every other area, however, was up, and in some cases up pretty big. The annual fund contributions grew by almost 35%. So it moved from 1.1 million to almost 1.5 million last year. Restricted contributions to leadership programs grew 6%, moving from about 413,000 to 440,000. And then scholarship contributions grew significantly, 197% year over year, from $230,000 to $681,000. But I do want to go back to the annual fund for just a moment and talk a little bit about its importance. It's first off driven by four key strategies. These are the things that we lean into every year that are just critical to the annual fund success. So Board of Governors acquisition and retention, trying to join that lead or grow that leadership society. Founders Day of Giving, direct mail, and also SigEp events. Board of Governors membership is up 28% over the last 4 years. So we hit 463 members this past fiscal year. So the highest that we've been in at least recent memory since we've been recording membership. And if you look at Founders Day of Giving, this has been the foundation's most successful fundraising initiative over the last 6 years. And likely well before that. It's just grown significantly over the past few years. And even more pronounced if you look at the percentage of total unrestricted giving for the fiscal year that's coming from Founders Day of Giving. Last year, it was more than 60% of the annual fund. The year before that, it was about 50. And so I think this just shows the importance of Founders Day of Giving, but also the excitement that surrounds Founders Day of Giving today. It's a critical part of what we do to support the undergraduate experience. And so we're looking forward to Founders Day of Giving 2022 and seeing if we can't exceed what we did last year and maybe exceed $1 million. Next, our direct mail efforts have also seen success, but this looks a little bit more inconsistent. So you've seen some ups and downs, and this is really just a difficult area for us to assess independently of other strategies, because we're finding that as we're communicating with our donors, more of them are participating in Founders Day of Giving and making their gift online in Founders Day of Giving. And so we still look at direct mail as a critically important tool, but it contributes to the overall success because there's so much important messaging that we're getting out to our donors and potential donors through direct mail. And so I emphasize the importance of the annual fund, because when you look at the annual fund as a percentage of the grant to the fraternity, you just see how significant it is. So that box the circle in the bottom right shows the breakdown between the annual fund's contribution to the grant and the contribution from our endowments. The grant here, the number is a little bit higher because we're including some of the contribution from last year that went into the conclave. So that's a little bit higher than what you saw on a previous screen, but this is how we look at the grant. And again, it underscores the importance of the annual fund. Almost 80% of the grant is coming from the annual fund today, which means about 20% is coming from our endowments. It's also worth pointing out that registration revenue program registration revenue is almost twice the spending policy revenue from those endowed funds. 48% of programming is funded today by the annual fund, and that's just significant. So we've got a lot of ambition when we look at programs both regionally and nationally, but also what we'd like to do at the chapter level and impacting more of our undergraduates every day at the chapter level. But I don't think it's a stretch to say that we're kind of living paycheck to paycheck by having this dependency on the annual fund. And we need to have a better major gifts effort or transformational gifts effort to increase the endowment and that source of sustainable financing for our programs. I hope that everyone on the call feels like SigEp is worthy of those investments. We just haven't been asking, and it's time to do that. We're going to talk more about making investments in a major gifts program and how we can create a culture of giving in SigEp when we get into investments that we're making in this fiscal year. But it is difficult for the fraternity to commit to new programs without confidence in a permanent source of financing. And while we've got great confidence in the annual fund, again, we're hoping to move that endowment up and create some greater confidence in that permanent source of financing for what we do. So given where we are with time, I'm going to try and move through SigEp National Housing a little bit faster than what we've done with the fraternity and the foundation. Again, just a couple of basics on what SigEp National Housing does. So SigEp National Housing performs really three services. One, it operates as kind of a quasi bank. So it does lending, and it offers savings vehicles for our ABCs. It also manages property. It does so in collaboration with ABCs and directly for about 25 SigEp properties. And it also provides ABCs consulting on new projects and daily operations. And so when we look at how we've done in these three areas, first looking at lending, since early 2020, we've made almost $4 million in loans for new construction and renovation. But SigEp also does refinancings with ABCs and competes kind of in the open financing market to secure loans and help our ABCs with their financing of real estate. Today, we have 48 loans with a total principal balance of right about $29 million. And then I mentioned that we offer a savings vehicle for ABCs that are looking for some return, low risk return. So we do offer a savings vehicle that's tied to the 10-year treasury. And so if you are interested in learning more about that, please drop your name in the chat, and we can have Ben Hutto, who's the SCNH managing director, follow up with you later this week and talk to you more about what SCNH does and how it can be helpful to your ABCs, your ABC. I mentioned earlier that SCNH manages property. Again, we're managing about 25 properties with about 600 beds, and that doesn't include the properties that are being master leased right now. So if there's a chapter that's dormant and we're looking for a way to cash flow the real estate, we work with the ABC to secure a master lease tenant and ensure that we're able to keep that property in great condition as we prepare for the return of a SigEp chapter. When we look at the financial performance of SigEp National Housing, just at a high level, similar to the other entities, we're expecting to outperform the budget. And so revenues are looking better than expected, and expenses are looking better than expected. And so we should end this year with a small surplus at year end. And any surplus that SigEp National Housing is going to achieve at year end, it's going to be capital that SigEp National Housing is going to reinvest in future loans and helping ABCs finance projects and advance their commitment to the SigEp learning community vision. So again, if you're interested in learning more about SigEp National Housing and talking about ways that it can support your ABC, please put your name in the chat, and we'll make sure that we can follow up and connect you with Ben Hutto and the SCNH team. So the third part of what we wanted to get into today is to talk a little bit about the investments that we're making in this fiscal year. So the fiscal year we just started on July 1. In the budget that the board approved last month, there are 5 areas that I would say are notable investments, areas that we're really leaning into. Those are marketing and branding for growth, alumni communications and engagement, volunteer education and volunteer impact, chapter officer development, and ongoing annual support. And then lastly, fundraising and program sustainability. So on the first issue of marketing and branding, I'm going to probably share some things that you may have already heard in previous sessions, but there is a national decline in rush participation today. And coupling that with the general reputational issues of Greek life, that's led to a decline in fraternity membership. Today, only 1 in 11, so about 12% of college undergraduates are arriving on campus seeking to join a fraternity or sorority. Most of them go through, 9%, thank you, Heather, I was going in the wrong direction. Most of them go through an expedited or very superficial process where Greek organizations vie for their attention and try to select their members. And the rest of the undergraduates in large part are either unaware of fraternities and sororities or have a preconceived notion that limits their interest in joining. And when all is said and done, only about 8% now of college men on campuses or are joining fraternities in that Greek community. So add to that the challenges that we're facing with the changing demographics on campus. More than 30% of students are first gen and have little to no experience with Greek life growing up. And there's an anticipated drop in enrollment that we're expecting in the next 5 years. So it is time to enhance and reconsider the way that we identify, the way that we engage, and the way that we appeal to potential new members. It's a time to meet potential new members where they are versus waiting for them to come to us in some sort of rush process. SigEp's growth committee has been just phenomenal working with the staff to identify a partner firm that specializes in branding and digital marketing for the undergraduate segment that we're targeting. And so we've identified someone to assist SigEp in developing branded recruitment and a branded recruitment campaign and the resources to support that campaign. The firm is called The Basement, and they're going to assist us with the 3 things that you see on the screen there: distilling a compelling core message, developing a branded recruitment campaign that includes visual brand guides, a pitch, visual imagery, and recommendations for additional materials that will roll out to our core audiences. And then also providing market research that supports the campaign around what matters to college men today as they're selecting activities to participate in or organizations to join on campus. To execute this strategy, we're going to be adding a position to the marketing and communications team. So this staff member is going to complement the growth efforts by working with and supporting our vice presidents of communication and trying to advance the recommendations that are being made to us by our partner firm. So the next area of alumni communications and engagement. Despite having more than 250,000 living alumni, only 3,300 of them are volunteering for SigEp today, and that's looking at the national level and local level. As you saw earlier, about 5,200 of them are donating to the Educational Foundation. So that's about 1.3% and 2% respectively. And I think if you were to think about that in terms of SigEp standards, you'd say that's unacceptable and we should be doing a lot better. And through regular and relevant communication with alumni, SigEp and our AVCs should be able to re-engage those alumni and build even stronger affinity over time and connecting them with the thing that they care most about. And that's their chapter. I mean, that's an entry point. A survey of all SigEp alumni have showed that the thing that they want to hear about most is their chapter, and they want to hear from their chapter. If an alumnus feels connected, no doubt he's more likely to engage as a volunteer and share his talents, maybe donate to local initiatives, and even contribute resources and time at a national level as well. So this summer we established an official partnership with Pennington and Company. It's a professional firm that's worked with many of our AVCs on alumni communication and fundraising efforts. And in this relationship, we're going to work with our AVCs to send regular chapter alumni newsletters, communications and appeals that are providing a critical service to our AVCs and our chapters, and foster that volunteer recruitment and engagement that we're looking for, to cultivate donors to restricted and unrestricted funds, and enhance the acquisition effort around alumni contact data that is just fundamental to communication and fundraising and volunteer engagement. So we hope that this initiative is going to benefit our chapters, our alumni and volunteer corporations, our fraternity, our foundation, and SigEp National Housing. So a win all the way around. The alumni and volunteer corporations who sign on to this communication program will work directly with Pennington and Company to mail and email 2 newsletters, 1 alumni bio update and 1 appeal per year. The service typically would cost AVCs about $7,000 plus printing and postage, and another $50 per hour for email newsletter setup. But we've been able to negotiate that cost down to about $5,500 per AVC. And under the SigEp partnership, AVCs are only being asked to pay $2,500 plus printing and postage. The fraternity and the foundation are going to pay Pennington directly $3,000 per AVC for this partnership in order to subsidize the program's cost and create a more attractive offer for our AVCs and get more of our AVCs to do this critical part of operations at a significant cost savings. With also, I think, having just a higher level of service by our staff being able to facilitate and automate some things for the AVC. This program is also going to be a significant lift, and it's going to require an additional staff member on our marketing and communications team. That person's time, however, is also going to be dedicated to promoting some of the SCNH programs and services that we mentioned earlier. And so we're grateful for SigEp National Housing sharing in the cost of this employee and allowing us to expand the staff this way. The third area that we're really leaning into is volunteer education and impact. As you've hopefully seen, SigEp's strategic plan includes a very ambitious but a necessary goal of recruiting no less than 15,000 volunteers. And this includes, again, no less than 5 Alumni Volunteer Corporation members. So that's inclusive of a president, a treasurer, a secretary, a vice president for alumni relations, and when necessary, a vice president of housing. And also on top of that, no less than 13 mentors for each executive officer, 1 for each executive officer, 1 for each challenge coordinator in the Balanced Man program, and a chapter counselor. Several volunteer related strategies are included in this budget to move SigEp closer to that goal, which I'll add, we also believe is the most important thing, the most significant thing that we can do to advance Balanced Man program adoption and SigEp learning community accreditation goals. So one of the things that we're doing here is investing in SigEp's district governor program, starting an annual district governor leadership conference this fall. And again, intend to see that done each year, each summer, as we head into our academic year and rev up, energize ourselves to provide our AVCs the services that they need for the academic year. At this upcoming conference, we're going to be setting a vision and goals for the year with our district governors. We're going to be agreeing on performance management processes and how we can help hold each other accountable to the volunteer recruitment and education goals that we have. We're going to talk about or provide education and training to our district governors that's critical to just elevating the district governor program and our effectiveness supporting our ABCs. Our district governors, if you know them, you know how committed they are to the success of SigEp and to the success of our ABCs. And we're grateful for the time that they put into SigEp and the investment they make in our volunteers. The second thing that we're investing in this area is in volunteer education. Our director of volunteer education and engagement, Brian Tenslinger, has just completed his volunteer listening tour, and there was so much that we learned from that engagement with volunteers. And one of the things that just really stood out is, hey, there's just too much inconsistency here, and we need to have something consistent for new and tenured volunteers to receive. So some initial training and some ongoing education in order for our volunteers to be effective in their respective role. We are very grateful for the Volunteer Development Committee for their ongoing work in this space to help us really flesh this out and address this critical need. The immediate initiatives that we're going to be tackling are the in-person education that's going to be offered at the Carlson Academies this upcoming year, and at Conclave next summer. And we're going to be bolstering our virtual education so that we can have some reach and engagement right out of the gate as we get things going with our district governors and ramp up the work of Brian. And that gets us to our third thing that we're investing in here, is we're going to be adding to that volunteer services team a volunteer recruiter, someone who can work with our volunteer services team and collaboratively with our district governors to recruit volunteers at select ABCs. This staff member would be responsible for building and testing some volunteer recruitment strategies with our district governors, and also be someone who can put in a little bit more elbow grease that we know is just, it's often required when we're talking about volunteer recruiting. So with that, I'll move on to the next section here, and that's making investments in chapter officer development and ongoing support. The emphasis here is to do more for all of our officers, right? Our investments are in officer support intended to provide year-round education, not just education at one point in the year, and services to our chapter officers that empower them to influence chapter culture, to align their strategy with national strategy, and to execute at the highest levels. There are several investments, again, that were being made in this space to better support our chapter officers. One we've talked about before, and that's expanding the Carlson Academies to include not just the 5 officers that we were able to send in 2022, but expand that to include all 8 officers this upcoming year, and add to that non-officer tracks, a volunteer track, and a donor experience in the 2023 Carlson Academies. And look, the only way that we're able to do this and do it confidently is because of the generosity of SigEp donors and what we were able to do with fundraising last year and the year before that, actually, that gave us the confidence to do this. And we feel confident that we're going to be able to do this in perpetuity because of where the annual fund is, and our confidence that we can keep it at that level as we continue to invest in fundraising. So the second thing is we're adding a chapter and ABC finance consultant to the SigEp staff as well. Tax compliance at the chapter and ABC levels have been a perennial issue for SigEp. And in addition to that, we've seen that chapters recently have regressed in their budgeting, their billing, collections, and their reporting practices. This new member of the SigEp finance team will work collaboratively with our FinComp committee, so our chapter finance and corporate compliance committee, to address all of these issues and work with the vice presidents of finance and the ABC treasurers to do this important work. But improvement in this area is going to yield stronger chapters that are allocating resources to the most important operational areas, and it's going to lower AR at a national level, which has been challenged since the pandemic. And when we do better with AR, that's more funding that is going back into the undergraduate experience. And so there's confidence that this position does more than pay for itself when we look at chapter performance and the improvement made to AR and resources going back into the undergraduate experience. The third thing that we're doing in this area is we're going to be recruiting a director of education to join the staff this year. Our staff members responsible for program implementation have long tenure at SigEp. I think anyone who knows Stacy Nicodemus respects her and considers her to be an expert in her space. And we have not experienced the same tenure with staff members who are responsible for the development of curriculum and the resources that bring that curriculum to life, or the other experiential details that influence and guide the work of Stacy and her team. This budget allocates resources for an expert in undergraduate and volunteer development, so someone who has significant experience and expertise in this space. Someone who's a lot like Brian Tinslinger on the volunteer side, someone who can truly make SigEp's Balanced Man program and national programs premier learning experiences and continue to elevate them on an annual basis. The last area that I've mentioned and where we're going to be making investments is in fundraising. We talked about our fundraising needs earlier and the funding needs earlier. We talked about the fraternity and what's going on in the strategic plan. But to secure that funding to do the things that we aspire to do, we need to operate more like a college or a university and talk about the impact that we make on young men like colleges and universities do. We have so many successful and passionate alumni who have the means of changing young lives through their contributions to our educational foundation. And we have to build better relationships with those alumni. We have to share inspiring stories that drive you and me to give the way that we do today and more. On August 1, so just a few weeks from now, SigEp's new Chief Development Officer will begin his role at SigEp. Matt Andrew just completed his role as Vice President of University Advancement at St. Cloud State University in Minnesota, where he led that institution through a campaign that has had a significant impact on what that university is able to do. And we hope that he can bring that same level of success to SigEp. Later this summer, after we've been able to get Matt up and running, we're going to be adding 2 experienced advancement officers to his team and a stewardship coordinator to that team. And again, I do want to stress experienced advancement officers. We're looking for people who are proven in the fundraising space, who are going to be able to really take our foundation and the resources that we're investing in the undergraduate experience to the next level. This is going to be the largest investment in fundraising in our foundation's history, but I think you would agree, our undergraduates deserve that. And the board and I are excited for what we can do with an experienced team of fundraising professionals. So having now talked for almost an hour, I'll close by saying thank you. Thank you for the time that you've shared with SigEp tonight, but also for the time and the investment that you make in SigEp every day, and that you'll likely continue to make. We're so appreciative for what you do, and look forward to what we're going to be able to do together next year and in the years beyond that. So thank you. And with that, Heather, I'll turn it over to you and see if we can address some of the questions that have been asked. I haven't been able to keep up with all of them, so I will be looking to you to do that.
You bet. I think we've got them all. Please do remember, put them in the Q&A box. It helps make sure that we don't miss any. And we just want to make sure that we answer your questions. So please use that Q&A box. Brian, I'll go back to one of the slides that we shared in the beginning. Someone was seeking clarification on what really is the definition of overhead, and how does that differ from, say, fraternity services. I believe the question was, the explanation doesn't foot with a 400 per man insurance fee or increase. And so really looking at what's overhead and how does that tie to fee increases.
Sorry, can you repeat what didn't tie, just so I can
Yeah.
address that?
So the definition, so it's Cliff Canunan asking. So Cliff, if I don't get this right, please do clarify your question. But the explanation of what you described as overhead needs clarification because it doesn't seem to tie with a per man fee increase. So how does that relate, and what really is overhead? And I will put that back up on the screen here for us as well. So go ahead and I'll get that back up.
Yeah, it probably doesn't tie to the per man fee increase if you're just looking at the fall bill. The fee increase, the per man fee increase on the fall bill is tied to the higher ed price index. We cap it at 3% annually, and so we look back at how that index has performed year over year. And this is something that our undergraduates chose to incorporate into the fall bill at a conclave, I think back in 2013. And this was a way for us to consistently have some sort of consideration for inflation and not have to go back to undergraduates every 2 years asking for a fee increase. They just tied it to something that was closer aligned to what they see in higher education. And so we chose the higher ed price index that Common Fund will report out on an annual basis. So when we look at overhead, just get to that part of the question, we're talking about our accounting staff, some of our leadership team, parts of marketing communication are going to be included in there. Our information systems team is going to be included in there. So there are a number of staff members that are included in there that really make the wheels go round in Richmond and facilitate the work of the other teams on staff.
Got it. Okay. All right, let's see. David asked, can you give a bit more explanation on the decline in membership since 2016? That seems like a long downward trend. Any ideas on why?
Yep. So in 2015, and I think, credit to our board, going all the way back to 2013. And in 2013, we were committed to addressing what was an out of control loss run. We had a number of years where we were growing, but the claims and the severity of those claims led us to have conversations around existential threats to SigEp and to Greek life. And our board and the staff at the time said, look, let's just put our pledge model chapters and their average performance next to the Balanced Band program chapters and see how they stack up. And in every single area, our Balanced Band program chapters outperformed groups that still had pledging and high-risk activities incorporated into the experience. And at that point in time, we said, we're going to commit to this thing that we started in the early 90s for good reason and get all of our chapters operating under a single model that's clearly the better model. And I liken this to a business having several different lines of products. If one is clearly not as good as the other and is a loss leader for you, you're probably going to sunset that product. And that's the way that our board looked at it. I mean, we're not going to play with the lives of young men. Our values tell us to take care of each other and to put each other in a position to grow and develop and to be our best. And we started down that path early that decade. In 2015, we passed that Balanced Band program legislation for all of our chapters to begin aligning under the Balanced Band program. And there were some holdouts, and that led to a significant decline in the total number of chapters and to membership. And we saw that accountability process take place over several years. Then we did it again when we further investigated the threat of alcohol misuse and abuse in our chapter homes, and how alcohol had largely dominated the culture of our chapter homes, and us wanting to reclaim that chapter culture and align that chapter culture with the Balanced Man program and with SigEp's learning community concept. And when that was adopted in 2017, there was another, series of chapters who said, I didn't sign up for this. I'm committed to some of these high risk activities. And our board said, okay, thank you for being honest with us. We're going to continue to focus our attention on the chapters that are great representation of SigEp and that our donors really want to invest in. And so there's been a lot of accountability over the past now 8 years. And we have seen that decline in total chapters lead to a decline in membership. And I think, as I referenced earlier, I think now we're very close to what that low point would be, and we're going to start seeing some growth. And there's just I think there's a lot of anecdotal evidence and maybe even some quantitative evidence to suggest that that's the case. I just continue to hear from program facilitators and volunteers that the young men that they're interacting with today just feel bought in at a level that they haven't experienced before. There's very little hesitancy to talk about the things that are going on. There's greater commitment to talk about how we're going to make the chapter better. And I felt that firsthand most recently at the Ruck Leadership Institute a few weeks ago in Richmond. I sat with 7 young men that were on Team Chuck, our new team to celebrate Chuck White, and nonstop conversation of all the stuff that they were doing. And I've gone to 12 Rucks and 12 dinners, and I haven't had that conversation before. It just that to me was just another anecdotal piece of evidence that it just felt different.
Got it. I love to hear that. Gabe Vasquez asked, you spoke at the beginning of the call about the financial pressures for undergraduates today. How do we plan to assist undergraduates specifically for those who may have not a strong financial background or economic SES as they come into school?
Yeah, we continue to wrestle with this. I tried to emphasize in the presentation that we're very sensitive to the cost of education and the debt that a lot of young people are taking on in order to get their diploma. And I think one of the things is there's the obvious answer of needing to raise more funds for scholarship. I think part of the challenge with scholarship efforts right now is that tuition is so high, you need significant scholarships in order to make an impact. And so I think a lot of our alumni volunteer corporations that are thinking about fundraising today are raising money for direct spend funds. So not endowments, but dollars that come in and then go right out that year, so that they can maximize the impact of giving that year. For the national organization too, I think it's us continuing to keep an eye on what the fees are that are passed on to chapters. I mean, I hope that spring bill number just doesn't change, and that it can go down as we prove to our insurance carrier that we're the safest partner in the fraternal space. As we raise more money, I hope that we can look at that fall bill a lot differently than we do today. But there's so much that we can do through successful fundraising and investing in our young brothers. And that's why we closed the way that we did tonight, talking about our investment in the foundation and turning our foundation into something that's representative of what we're all used to seeing in higher education. There's no reason that our foundation is a fraction of what some universities are. 90% of the time that an undergraduate spends on campus is going to be with us. It's out of the classroom. And we can put a lot of money to work and do some amazing things with scholarship and with programs and with housing to make that 90% of time that people spend with us transformational.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple of questions on the foundation front, so I'll take those. Tristan asked for scholarship funds. So, for example, a BMS, does the chapter pay for a scholarship out of its budget, or is that primarily donor dollars?
So I think we see a little bit of both. More recently, I think there's just been greater collaboration between the undergraduate chapter and the ABC to talk about what the undergraduate chapter can do to communicate to volunteers or alumni the need to raise scholarship money. And so you're seeing a lot of chapters now talking about this alumni communication program that we're rolling out and how they can help their ABC do that. A lot of vice presidents of communication are sending direct messages to alumni, sharing with them what's going on and what the need is. So there's certainly a desire to fundraise for that scholarship. When some chapters don't feel like there's enough, or they want to show some alumni that they're committed, they are allocating a part of their operating budget to scholarship, and they're making scholarship contributions or scholarship awards at their Balance Man Scholarship Banquet. And that's just been amazing to see, especially when you see that some of those young men who are in the chapter are first gen students. They're carrying debt to be a part of the chapter, and they're still making the contribution to dues to see that other people who need the support are getting it.
And such a big opportunity in that Alumni Communications program as well, that's really set up to help ABCs raise funds for things like those scholarships. Paul had a question about the foundation's restricted and unrestricted funds. If someone's going to say, hey, I would love to give money from an organizational perspective, does SigEp prefer restricted gifts or unrestricted gifts coming in? He noted that the annual fund was about a third of our total giving. So what's our preference there, and how do we put that to good use?
Yeah,
Love this question.
and look, I think it's a good one to talk about too, because I think from the immediate need perspective, an unrestricted gift means that everything that you're contributing that year is going right out to supporting the undergraduate experience. I think just to take a step back though, I want you to give to what you're passionate about, and I want you to feel the impact that you're making in that area that you're passionate about. And to feel the connection to the success that we have in that area. And I think that's kind of what the fundraising world is about, is you've got a passion and we have a need, or our undergraduates have a need, and where those two things connect or align is where the magic happens. And everyone wants that fulfillment to be there. So when you think about it purely from a financial perspective, I think an unrestricted gift is going to have the greatest impact. When you think about where a donor really has a passion, give to that passion, and let's try to create a permanent source of financing to advance that passion. And then we never have to think again about whether or not there's the resources to do that thing.
Van asked, have we considered renaming the equity management fund? It's not quite managed or equity in a traditional sense, right?
That is right. It's not the equity management. I'm sorry, the equity management fund, or this?
The EMF, yeah.
Yeah.
Can you describe what it is, maybe, and what it does?
Yeah. So the EMF is a savings vehicle where an alumni volunteer corporation can say, I just have a savings account. It's sitting in a checking account. It's not making anything. I don't want to put it into the market because of how volatile the market is and the downside risk that is there. And so we have this equity management fund that is a savings vehicle for our ABCs. It's the return on that is absolute and tied to the 10-year treasury. So if you're a short-term investor in the fund, you're going to receive back the 10-year treasury rate minus 50 basis points. If you're a long-term investor in the fund, so it's going to stay there for an extended period of time, the rate of return is going to be equal to the 10-year treasury rate.
Couple of questions about fall and spring bills. Stephen asked, what are our peer organizations doing with their drastically increasing insurance premiums? Do they pass them along as fees, or do they simply have less coverage, and what would that mean for them?
Yeah, it's both.
It's pretty
How much,
risky.
how much time do we have? Uh, yeah, look, our per man rate is dramatically lower than what other fraternities have. And so when we're worried about increasing the spring bill, it is shocking to consider the conversation that other fraternities are having when their per man rate is 2 times what ours is. um, to alleviate that, some of them are cutting back on coverage, um, and that is going to be risky for them because at the same time, at least from my perspective, I don't see a lot of them that are investing in the same risk mitigating strategies that we have for the last 8 years. We've been very focused on providing a more valuable and relevant experience while reducing risk. Other organizations have been very focused on just continuing to operate as though nothing has changed. And the insurance carriers are getting impatient. I think you've just seen a harder market in the insurance space when it comes to fraternities. And I've seen more conversation recently about insurance carriers really stipulating some terms that are operational in nature. So in order to be covered, you have to do these things. One organization that won't be named has been asked to do some things that SigEp has done. And again, I think we should all be proud of that. The insurance carrier is meeting with some of its clients and saying, look, if you want to continue to get coverage, you're going to do what SigEp has done. What they're doing is clearly working, and we're rewarding them, and we will continue to cover you and reward you too if you go down this path, because it creates a win-win. They're going to make money when there's not claims, and that's what they're in the business of doing. When they can't underwrite the fraternity space and they see severe claims that dramatically exceed what is being received in premium, they're just going to cut their losses.
And you're seeing it. You're seeing carriers leave the industry completely. Bill asked, what's the dollar increase on the fall bill? And so if you know it offhand, speak to it. If not, I've got the memo pulled up. So
yeah, please do, because I don't have it memorized or accessible offhand.
So for 2023, the per man fee increased by $269, and so that's in line with the higher education price index that we talked about earlier. And then we added the $3 technology fee to help fund and finance many of the initiatives we talked about earlier. Any additional context around that, Brian? That you wanted to?
I think just the only thing to add here is that I think I'll try and put it this way. Considering all of the things that are being asked of our undergraduates, I think the last thing that we want is for our experience to be looked at as kind of a luxury good. And the things that we're talking about doing, I think, make the SigEp experience an essential good on any college campus. And while we don't want to increase fees, I think the one thing that we do want to make sure that we have is that the value that we provide relative to the fees that are being asked is extraordinarily high, and that our undergraduates feel like this is the best investment that they've ever made, and they feel that way as they graduate and they enter the alumni ranks.
Couple of questions around communications. Christopher asked, what % of alumni do we have valid contact information for? That's a significant challenge at the local level. And he's asking in relation to that Alumni Communications program. Chris, I think that's a big piece of why we hope to partner with AVCs at the local level for communications. We have 67% of our alumni that we have good addresses for, and 38% that we have good email addresses for. And so working with you, we'd also take, if the AVC has its own contact list, we bring those together so that you're working off of the best list that you can possibly work off, and increase that over time through regular contact updates that we've been making. We've actually this spring significantly increased our contact data with about 25,000 new pieces of contact information through things that we're doing with the journal and mailing, and working with the post office, as well as the oral history project on that. To tie to that, Sammy Hydrick asked if you have any comment on the oral history project that you'd like to make, Brian.
I mean, I did not know what to expect here. I think this does fall in the category of us looking for opportunities to engage with our alumni, get contact information, and find a way to add revenue without putting additional financial burden on the shoulders of our undergraduates. But I've actually been blown away by the number of stories that we've received. I mean, to have the number more than 11,000 stories that have been shared is really incredible. The number of people who have said, hey, I want to update my contact information and want to hear more about what's going on, I think has been incredible. I totally hear the feedback on how some of those phone calls have gone and how that's left some people maybe on this call feeling never an intention for anyone to feel like this is slimy or pushy. But there have been a lot of, I think, really great things that have come out of it. And it's led to some really good opportunities to re-engage some alumni who haven't been a part of the fraternity for a long time. And I can't wait to read some of those stories.
Yeah, I don't think we ever thought that we would get 12,000 people to tell their personal SigEp's story. That's incredible. And we've had 20,000 plus respond, which is, when you look at those volunteer numbers and you look at the propensity for people to engage, having more than 10% of our living alumni answer the call, I think is helpful. But yeah, we definitely take that feedback to heart and have looked to improve the process over time. A couple of additional communications questions. Paul asked, with the new marketing and branding work, how will we interact with each chapter to execute the new effort? And Brian spoke to that we're hiring someone on the marketing and communications team, and a big piece of their role will be one-on-one coaching, offering that with chapters on digital marketing, paid ad marketing, social media marketing, communications plans, interacting with their website, and really doing elevated coaching and elevating that VP communications role and what they do in their chapter. So we're really excited about that opportunity to offer a type of support in that area that frankly, no fraternity or sorority is offering to their members. Let's see. We've got one from Graham Hess about your DG support. He asked if we're also investing in the DG pipeline like lieutenant DGs.
We are going to be spending some time addressing that, going from the number of districts being in the 20s to now almost 40. We need to have a bench. And we need to make sure that our district governors have support and that there's a seamless transition when a district governor moves or something happens in his life and he has to step down. So there will be some attention given to that, Graham. I think it's likely going to come later in the year, and there will be some conversations that we'll have at this DG conference. But it's definitely something that we're keeping an eye on, and we don't look at it any differently than we do having a bench for a staff position or a bench for a national board, and wanting to make sure that we're thoughtful about the needs of the organization and that every district is getting the service that it needs.
On the line of volunteers, we had someone ask about our 15,000 volunteer goal. Is that 15,000 roles that we want to make sure that are filled and engaged, or is that 15,000 separate human beings?
Yeah, I think that the way that we initially did the math is around roles, but I don't think that there should be anything stopping us from trying to get 15,000 volunteers involved in the organization. It's a nice round number. And you heard me use the words no less as kind of a qualifier. I mean, with the number of people that we have in our organization, and then you look at some of the things that we're doing to engage campus professionals and spouses and parents, we should be able to hit 15,000 individuals. I feel it just is going to require us to think very differently about the way that we recruit volunteers and support volunteers in the organization. And we're going to need to do some things that we haven't done before, that think differently and act differently.
Chris asked about the updating contact information and when that updated contact information will hit SigEp from the initiatives we've been doing. Chris, we actually have had those 20,000 I'm talking about. You said you got your last list in May. We've had all of those since you've done that, and we will have, because of our journal going out, that updates quite a few addresses, as well as that oral history project. The oral history project will conclude next month, and so you'll see another big batch happen. And anytime we send a mailing out, which is about 8 or so times a year, 8 to 10, we additional have big batches with that. Let's see. Gabe, or wait, sorry, I'm like trying to, their questions are in different places.
I just love all of these comments.
Graham asked, are we still looking at 25K as a minimum for a new endowment?
Yes.
Okay. Paul asked, I love
I'll
this.
follow up with you, Graham.
Are you ready to start one, Graham? Great. Paul asked, this webinar, the ones that we've been having about transparency recently, specifically this one, is the first time he ever recalls seeing something like that. So big kudos to you, Brian, he says, in implementing business practices in a nonprofit environment. And then he asked, after your tenure, how will we guarantee such transparencies? And Paul, Brian's not going anywhere, but how do we plan to stay consistent with practices like this?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And our board has had the same conversation about what do we do as directors turnover. I think it's been a priority of us to make sure that we're documenting processes. Like we've stumbled too many times when we have staff turnover that things get lost, and it's because either one, it wasn't documented, or two, it was documented and stored in a place that no one knew how to get to. And so we've just done some very simple things, some tweaks to how we record processes and where those processes are stored. I think the way that I approach my role and that other leaders of the staff approach their role is that we don't want the organization to skip a beat if we were to leave. And that's the highest level of leadership, and that's what we try to do.
Absolutely. Tristan asked, how much is the ritual fee for SigEp? He's been told a couple amounts and is just trying to clarify that.
I do not know that number off the top of my head. Are we talking about going to the SigEp store and looking at virtual equipment?
I'm not sure. Tristan, if you have extra information on that, feel free to put it in and we will get that answer to you. Are you talking about how much it costs to buy a new trunk of equipment, or what exactly are you meaning? And that really is, most of our questions got answered. I think maybe he's asking about the new member fee, and that is the new member fee, $300.
Yes, it is.
Perfect. Yes, everyone says that. Once you join the chapter, there's a fee. Yes, the new member fee, $300. Okay, those are the questions that we have, I believe. Thank you to everyone. Brian, anything you'd like to say as we wrap up this evening?
Only thank you again to everyone. We've done just, I think, some incredible work together over the last few years, but this is a year that I think everyone's especially excited to get into. There's very, very thoughtful conversation being happened and investments being made in the undergraduate experience. And I think I'd speak on behalf of the board too, in saying thank you for the work that you do. We're grateful for the work that you do, and the contributions that you make to the fraternity and the foundation. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. And our next call will be in October. We'll provide updates coming out of the fall, and we hope to see you all back. We'll also have this recording and summary out within the next 7 days. Thank you all for spending your evening with us, and have a great night.
Good night, everyone.